He's Dave, and I'm Dallas, and we have opinions on just about everything. Sometimes they're on point, and sometimes they go down better with a glass of wine. Join us. This is the Wine and Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another Wine and the Podcast, where we pair wine with entertainment, delude ourselves into thinking you want to hear what we have to say about different pieces of pop culture and art, but know for a fact that you need to hear what we have to say about wine, because motherfucker, who knows anything about wine? We sure don't. That's not true. We actually totally do, and we can help you find the perfect pairing for whatever it is you're planning to read, watch, or listen to. Now, before we get started, please make sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. It does help this podcast grow and reach new listeners, and please leave a rating and or review. At least do so if you love us. If you don't love us, don't leave a review. Send us an email. Send a nasty email to wine, the letter N, P-O-D, @gmail.com. We will read that nasty email and take your feedback into consideration, and we will take it very seriously. So please send that email and see if we don't improve and get better. And if we don't, then leave that nasty review. That's right. Fair. I think that's fair. And if you can also make sure to find us on Substack. That is our home base of operations, wineand.substack.com, where you will be the first to know when new episodes drop. Get in-depth show notes, sometimes uncut versions of these episodes, bonus pairings, articles, chats, pairing directories, wineand.substack.com. Be a cool kid, drink the wine cooler aid, and join us on Substack, which, by the way, not incidentally, 30 minutes before starting this recording, we broke 300 subscribers on Substack. So I'm very proud of that. Woo! And the 300th subscriber is my ex-boss from Studio System Nielsen, Susan Stobner,
Nice.
which is, I know she gets to be. So Susan, if you're listening to this, she just started her own Substack a couple of weeks ago. And I subscribed to hers and then left a comment. She has a Substack called They Paved Paradise, which is all about exploring becoming a carless, or at least a less car full culture in LA.
Very cool.
Yeah. So talking about public transportation and how, because we have a lot of work to do before the Olympics in a couple of years that we're supposed to be housing, and we're supposed to have like a way to get around LA car free by the time the Olympics hits, and we're going to see how that goes, because man, LA has talked a good talk and not walked a good walk, at all. And I've been a walker in LA since I moved here, because I came here from New York, where I believed in public transportation. I believed in walking. Even before that, I was in the DC metropolitan area, and I walked around like a motherfucker. I was a sweaty, nasty mess walking around in the DC area all the time. And I had a car then. I did not have a car in New York. And then I held out on getting a car for years and years here in LA. And it wasn't until my parents essentially pawned one off on me that I was like, fine. and I took the car, and I still have that car today. But I was a believer in not needing it. As I get older, my joints are happier that I have a car. Sometimes it's like, sometimes you got to do the big grocery store haul, and don't walk, or don't even take that on a bus. Like just put it in a car and take it home, for God's sake. So sometimes it's good and necessary. But she started up that Substack, and then we connected, and now she just today became our 300th subscriber. Can I just say, folks, that surprisingly, the first 200 to 250 were a bit of an onslaught. Like we achieved that kind of quickly, because we started Wine and we were a wine and comics pairing thing where we only had like 50 to 60 subscribers, and it was so niche that we weren't really growing from there. And then we broadened and became Wine and we went from 50 to 250 in pretty short time. Yeah. And then these last couple of months or not even, like the last 2 months, that final 50 reaching up to 300 has been a bit of a slog. It's been of a slow burn, a slow climb. And I think by the time you're in between 200 and 300 subscribers, what I've noticed on Substack is that you bleed people finally for the first time, where you're gaining people, but then people are also effing off and unsubscribing at all. So you're like 2 steps forward, 1 step back every single week, where you're like, you're gaining 2 subscribers and then one just disappears. And Substack doesn't let you really, they're trying to keep it kind of ambiguous. So unless you are memorizing your 300 subscribers, you don't know who just effed off. Someone just did, right. And you're not sure who or why. They don't really leave feedback. So sometimes I think when you're at this many subscribers, now you have people where they change their mind. They're like, we're not really that interested in this. Never mind. And I have too many I've subscribed to too many things. Let's just start. Which ones do I read? Which ones do I not really read? Let's start culling my list. Or they don't like something you said or wrote or did. Which always happens. So you start to hit this number of subscribers where it's not your passionate, close enough, intense enough circle. And so now people are coming and going. And so these last 50 have been a surprising, like I've just noticed you hit something like 275, then 280, then you're back to 275. And you're like, wait a minute, what? and then you're back to 280 and then 282, but then back to 280. And you're like, oh my God. So it winds up being this much slower little climb, but 300, this will probably, I'm going to say, Susan, is our first 300th subscriber, because we're probably going to bleed some and actually fluctuate and before we pass it again, and then finally get past it to where we move forward from there. So, but this is our first 300th subscriber. Yay to us. Thank you. And thank you. Take it.
We love it.
Yes. And to the 300 people that are subscribers, we love you. We appreciate you through and through, even to those who were one of the 300 plus subscribers that then dropped out at some point. At some point, you were near and dear to us, and we do appreciate it, even if you decided to F off at some point. All right. So on that note, today we are here to tackle our very first short film. Wait, why a short film?
No. Well, wait. Is it the first? Wasn't the Irish one a short technically?
Oh, no, Dallas, that's a feature film. It was almost 90 minutes long.
Why did I think it was so short? Okay, go on. As usual.
Okay, good. For a moment, I thought you were about to say, like, what are we talking about today? I prepared for something totally different. I was like, oh no, this is gonna be an interesting episode.
That's so funny. I'm remembering that as a short, I guess, because it was so tight. It was a very tight 90 minutes. That's true. Yeah.
And it was under. I think it was 80 something minutes. But I mean, if you're like 70 minutes, you're a feature film. If you're over 60 minutes, you are technically a feature film at that point, even if you are a very, very short feature film.
Absolutely.
And it's indie, super indie, which this is also going to be super indie in its way. So why a short film? And this short film is a little unlike most you're going to encounter out there. In fact, you'll never encounter this one unless you take direct action to gain access to it, because this is a short film that is available to no one, yet anyone can gain access to watch it.
That's right.
The fucks am I talking about? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the short film in question, Who's There?, is the second proof of concept horror short by director Mike Pecci. And to understand what this film is and how to watch it, we have to talk about the man Mike himself. So I know Mike from I know of Mike from his podcast. I don't know Mike personally, or rather, Mike doesn't know who the fuck we are. So I know of Mike from his podcast. Yes, he's a fellow podcaster, In Love with the Process, a podcast where Mike talks to guests from various roles within the entertainment landscape to discuss their story, how they got to where they are, and the lessons they've learned along the way, basically being in love with the process of making it in this industry, achieving anything within this industry. He's talked to directors, cinematographers, actors, dancers, acting coaches, producers, writers, aerial camera operators, stunt people, executives, musicians, you name it. Mike has likely talked to them on the show, which is well over 300 episodes at this point. I think it might even be over, it might be approaching 350 at this. It might be over 350. I'm not sure.
Wow.
I think it's between 3 and 350. He also started a sister podcast with one of his acting muses, Lance A. Williams, called Right Place, Right Time, where the two also have guests from the industry on to discuss what their right place, right time moments were, and or what they believe that phrase to truly mean. Like, one of the things they explore on Right Place, Right Time is, what is a right place, right time? Does that exist? Is that a big part of what makes the world go round? The consensus generally is yes. Like, that you have to have right place, right time moments to make it. That's that luck factor, right? But it's also about, you have to expose yourself to right place, right time moments, right? It's like, if you're in your hidey hole working on your craft, nothing's ever going to happen. That's like, chances are that will never happen, because you're not out there meeting people, making connections, networking. Like, part of the quote unquote networking, which is kind of a dirty word and creatives don't like it because they're like, it should be about the quality of the output and things like that. And it's like, well, yes, but then, but someone has to read it, right? Or see it if it's a movie, or hear it if it's music or an audio something. Like, people have to be exposed to it, and to be exposed to it, you have to present or to, turn someone onto it. You have to be out there talking to people, and then they're like, oh, so, and it might happen that you mention you have a podcast on top of other things that you do, or, yes, you're a music video director or commercial director, but, you've done some narrative short films and you're working on a feature and blah, blah, blah. And this is where, and then if they've already liked your other work, they're like, oh, hey, now, wait a minute. I have either I am or I know of someone who might be interested in taking a look at your stuff, so on and so forth. Like, these are right place, right time moments, right? And so the sister podcast, if you just look for In Love with the Process podcast, both podcasts are listed under that. So if you go to Spotify, if you go to Apple iTunes, you just get all of it in one go. And there's a lot out there. You can also go to his website, inlovewiththeprocess.com, where he curates it by subject matter. So if you're only interested in hearing about directors, you can just find all the episodes that have directors or writers or cinematographers or what have you. So you can curate it a little bit rather than wading through, each individual episode and trying to find it. Now, Mike hails from Boston and got started as a music video director. One of my favorite stories he's told on his podcast, is, and this is in Mike's own words, when I was first getting started, I called up Roadrunner Records. I was watching MTV2 at the time and saw the latest video from Killswitch Engage. In my young arrogance, I thought it sucked. I can make a better video, he thought. And I just want to say, Mike, by the way, if you ever listen to this, I know you're a comics guy as well. And Alan Moore, one of the great comics writers out there, he has something that he says that one of the best things any up and coming creator can do. And Alan Moore was talking about writings and writers specifically, but I think this pertains to all creatives, is to consume things that are bad, that you think are not good, because it makes you think, I could do this. I could do better than this. And that is motivating to actually create and to do your own stuff. And so he believes that is a great motivating factor. Now, Mike thought this. And again, in Mike's own words, so I sat down and wrote an email explaining how shitty I thought the video was and how I could do it better. I then cold called the label and somehow got their rep on the phone. Quote, I'm reading your email now, he said. I sat in silence as he read through my bullshit. At the end, he said, who the fuck are you? What have you done? The guy was pissed, and rightfully so. I went on to explain how I thought I could make a better video, and I gave the guy credit for putting up with me. He told me, well, you're never going to do a video for us, and hung up the phone.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So just so you know, these things are fun anecdotes, but they do not, like, having that bravado does not always, if even often, actually lead to you getting gigs and getting your foot in the door.
No,
Every once in a while, I've heard the stories. Like there are musicians who have been really cocksure about things. Now, you don't denigrate what the other, because I've heard another story recently about a musician who wanted to work with the ex Genesis guitarist who now has a huge solo career, Steve. I should know all the Genesis guys.
I know,
Hackett.
but
Steve Hackett.
Hackett, yes.
So a drummer wanted to work for Hackett, and instead of saying like, yeah, your music sucks, I can make it all better, that's not going to get you anywhere. But what he said is he wanted to audition they were looking for a new drummer, and he missed the window. They're like, we're pretty sure we know who we're going to go with, but keep in touch. And at first he was like, oh, okay, yeah, that sucks. But then he called back and he's like, look, can you pass on a message to Steve? Tell him if he'll let me audition and he doesn't decide to go with me, I will pay for the room that we audition in. Because, you have to rent out the room. And he's like, but if he goes with me, then he pays for it. And that message.
Ballsy.
Yeah. So ballsy, but not denigrating.
Exactly.
Right? Not mean and nasty. And that actually, Hackett decided, he's like, this guy's got balls. And so he wrote back and he's like, let's do it. And he did wind up going with the guy. So it just goes, so you can be ballsy, you can have chutzpah or whatever you want to call it, but don't denigrate the work of other people.
It is walking a fine line because it is art. So they're going to take your critique personally. And if it comes off really targeted and nasty and aggressive, you're going to be someone they just shut out, you know. But if you have some critique and a way to kind of make it better or add something to it, then generally you're going to be appreciated. So don't just go in balls out being an asshole.
Right. Ballsy is not necessarily a bad thing, but negative ballsy and denigrating ballsy, these are not great. These are not winning combos. Don't do that. So after saying you will never do a video for us and hanging up the phone, Mike says, fast forward 6 years later, high-fiving Jesse and Adam on the set of our first Killswitch Engage video. Funny story that no one knows about until now. Bottom line is, yes, you can write to your favorite bands, but be sure you can back it up. Find a friend who has a small band and make them a video first. You are going to learn shit doing that you will need when doing something bigger. Mm-hmm. So Mike did have to climb that. When he says fast forward 6 years later, like he did have to work his way up that ladder. Like he had to start with much smaller bands. He had to make videos. He had to do the work. And he even created a small music video, essentially production company in Boston that was, for this purpose, and then worked his way back. And he finally did do a Killswitch Engage video. And I believe when I listened on his podcast, he basically said that when he did, like, these guys still had the same reps, and the reps did not know this was the guy who called them all that time ago.
That's how you do it. That's how you do it.
Right, because they're not going to really remember who you are. They might remember the story and tell that story of like, some kid once called me up, right? And like they might relate that as like a can you believe this shit story. But they're not remembering your name. And they've never seen you before, probably. So it's like they're not going to. You don't have a target on your back from something like that if it's that early in your career. If you're doing it as a complete nobody, that make your mistakes when you're the nobody, and
absolutely
don't banner wave your name when you do that. Just go ahead and try it and fail and burn out, and then
never do it
again. Right, exactly. So that was Mike doing music videos in Boston. Fast forward many years later, and Mike suffered a near-death experience when he went ice skating to impress a date, or rather, he went on a date and it was ice skating, but he'd never ice skated before, I believe. Now, this date is
Mike.
Now, this date is a woman who is now his fiance today.
Nice.
So it worked out, but he fell and hit his head and suffered a hematoma inside his skull. Right near, and this was a hematoma that was right near a main blood vessel. So normally when they want to do a hematoma, they drill into the skull to release the hematoma. But it was where it was located. If they drilled too deep, it would hit the blood vessel and he would bleed out and die. So They waited a couple. They're like, let's wait to see if the bleeding stops on its own. We don't want to risk drilling in there. That is really hard to do it that finely. So they waited 5 days, and it did stop on its own. But then he had months of recovery because he had a concussion and things of that nature. So while he was recovering, he experienced a certain disassociation, such as hearing voices in his head that during that time he was convinced weren't his own. And this
Sweet.
was an so this is something that like later he's like, no, okay, those were, but like he remembers in the moment believing they weren't, right? Because
auditory
of how mucked up his
hallucinations,
head. Right, exactly. He had suffered such trauma in his head that this was something that he had. And then during recovery, he realized that having suffered a near-death experience, the one regret he would have had was not making the films he truly wanted to make if he had died in that
This
moment.
guy.
This guy.
Oh, this is a Hollywood outsider story right here. This is
Exactly.
an indie darling in the making.
Exactly. Because he had gotten really comfy making him music videos, I think commercials, things like that. Like he was a production company. They hired him,
gigging,
he got gigs. Right, exactly. He was gigging and fighting for gigs too, right? You pitch for gigs and things like that on these things. So once he recovered, he realized everything else in life, like, you know, he had met this girl that was going really well. He kind of was financially, he was doing okay because with this production company, but he was not taking risks. He wasn't doing the things he really wanted to be doing. This was supposed to be a stepping stone, you know, into what he actually wanted to do. And he had kind of lost sight of that. So he was inspired. He stopped putting off working on a passion project and was inspired by the dissociative experience that he had suffered while having the hematoma. And he combined that with this urban legend called the Well to Hell. And the Well to Hell is a legend about a Soviet drilling project in Siberia that supposedly drilled down, reached a cavity filled with fire and screaming. However, the Soviet Union actually drilled the Koala super deep borehole on the Kola. Yeah, super deep borehole on the Kola Peninsula, which is not in Siberia. The Kola super deep borehole reached a depth of 40,230 feet in 1989. And while geological anomalies were found, no supernatural encounters were reported, but this urban legend persists that they drilled a well to something like hell. So Mike was like, okay, I think there's a way to combine like the type of experience of someone almost being possessed, right? Like when you have that voice in your head that isn't your own kind of a thing, and connecting it to something like this Well to Hell that would just be super visually and conceptually really cool for a film. So Mike wrote a script called 12 Kilometers or 12 km, which 40,000 feet is 12,262 meters, right? So he was like 12 kilometers, that's the depth of the drilling. So 12 km. Now, being an idiot, he decided it would take place in Russia and be performed entirely in Russian. Mike is neither Russian nor does he speak it. So Boston, I love it. Dallas is like all in, like in for a penny, in for a pound. Now, Boston does have a pretty significant Russian population. So he was still living in Boston at the time. So he put casting notices all around, and one of his neighbors, Gene Ravin, responded. Gene was cast in a supporting role in 12 Kilometers, but I believe he was also instrumental in translating the script into Russian and securing other Russian actors as well as translators to work on set. So because everyone spoke Russian in this movie, many of them did not speak a lot of it. I believe some of the actors like were not big English speakers per se. There was some like they needed translators on there. And Mike didn't speak a lick of it. So he was there as the English speaking director directing this whole dog and pony show. Everyone speaking in Russian, and he just had to trust that the script was what it was supposed to be. And apparently the translation was tricky because Mike being, he's an East Coast American full of cynicism and satirical ways of thinking. And, Russian is according to him, he's like, Russian is a very literal language. You don't do this sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Not satirical, sarcasm. There was a lot of sarcasm in the way people were speaking to each other, and that does not translate. Like Russians don't do sarcasm. They're very blunt, or the way the language works.
It's cold. Every syllable matters.
Right. It's very direct. So there was a lot of things that needed to be translated properly for that, or tweaked to like make it a proper Russian script. So 12 km was partially funded via crowdfunding. By the way, we are not here to talk about 12 km. So we're just on the journey to talk about but we do need to know all of this to understand why we're talking about what we're talking about today. So 12 km was partially funded via crowdfunding on Kickstarter, raising just under $17,000. It was filmed entirely using practical effects. Now, this is something that is really, if and when you see 12 km, and I'll talk about how you might be able to see 12 km during this podcast episode, as well as how to see the short we are here to talk about today. But when you see it, you will be stunned to know that it's all practical effects, because some of the visual effects, they seem tailor-made to be digital. And some of the way they even look, you're like, that you had to have done that digitally, right? And like, he did it. Like, there is a black ooze that is sort of a sentient black ooze that comes out of this pit, and he used it using what do they call it? Ferro liquid, the stuff you can control with magnets.
Yeah.
And they controlled it with magnets and then reversed the shot to make it flow in a way that is like, you look at it and you're like, whoa, that's cool. But it is all actual liquid that they are maneuvering on camera as you like physically. None of it is digital effects. So that is a really cool thing about 12 km. Now, when the film was completed, Mike knew a number of people who worked in the Boston Film Festival circuit, so he invited them all over to a screening. He played them a movie, and he played them 12 km. When it was done, the room was dead quiet. And he was like, okay, so what'd you guys think? And they said, yeah, it's fantastic. It's great. And he's like, awesome. So where should I submit it to? And they said, nowhere. It's not going to get into anywhere. Because it was too long at just under 30 minutes. All right. Now, this kind of took Mike by surprise. This was a bit of a shock because technically, under the standard film festival short film maximum, there's usually a maximum of 30, sometimes even 40 or 45 minutes for a lot of festivals. And let's talk about that, though, because, yes, technically, film festivals give themselves an out of going up to 30 to 40 or 45 minute and calling it a short film. But no one wants to program that because when you program a film festival, there are physical days with physical minimal, like maximum amounts of time in that day to play these shorts. A lot of times the short blocks are like, here's an hour. How many shorts can you cram into this hour on this day and then one more hour tomorrow? You want to give as many opportunities as you can to as many people. And if one person is taking up half of that hour, that is one person. Nobody wants to do that unless you are a big celebrity filmmaker. Then maybe they always want to leave themselves that out. If like you are, let's say you're a filmmaker who like this festival is where you got your start and now you're a big time, but you want to come back to the film festival that gave you your beginning and do a brand new proof of concept 30-minute short. Sure, you can do that, but they're not going to program yours, man. No. Right? It's like they're not going to do that. They don't want to. They want to do more shorts in that time. So 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes, absolute maximum, but really 10 minutes and under is what you're aiming for. So Mike was effed. He
real quick, if you are listening to this, Mike, as a person who routinely writes short films that are upwards of 40 minutes, I understand, my friend. I understand.
Yes. Now, to Mike's credit, though, he only did it because he thought he could, right? And so,
no, I can't, but I still do it.
and the best part is, it was always in his mind. 12 kilometers was always a proof of concept for a feature length version, right? So he actually, in retrospect, or not retrospect, in interviews since, he has said that like for the feature length version, this would be the cold opening, this short part. And he's like, it wouldn't be this long, actually. It would only be like 10 minutes long, but then there'd be a lot more coming for the rest of the film. But he padded it out to make it more of a standalone feature. He thought that was better to add more to it and make it a 20-something minute short, because now it's a more robust standalone quote-unquote feature, like a feature short.
Right.
And that wound up being like shooting himself in the foot, because that is exactly what no one wants. They actually want the 10-minute cold opening. But leave us hanging. It's a short. Who gives a fuck? Like most shorts leave you hanging. They always end on this sort of open note. Like you can walk away, but you're like, of course, the short is meant to make you want more. Right? You want more either from the story or from this filmmaker or from these performers. That it whets the appetite. That is what a short film is really meant to do. You don't really want it to be so done in done in a few minutes that you're like, yeah, cool, I'm good. I don't need to see anything else from this person or from like that.
Right. You want to whet the appetite. You want to stimulate the curiosity. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. So now, frustrated that he had made this film that essentially was dead in the water, Mike was friends with a writer who asked if she could see the film and write a review for it on the Twitch website. Today, that's known as Screen Anarchy. But back then, Mike had never heard of the site. Bad Mike. That is bad. I loved Twitch back in the day. Yeah. It was my go-to. It's not what it used to be now.
It was so much fun back in the day. It's just it was just sort of the Wild West in a weird way. Like it was just fantastic.
It was one of the best genre film sites that was out there back in 2010. Nowadays, there's is it City on Fire? I think is one that does a lot of action and like Asian cinema and genre cinema. Screen Anarchy still exists and it's still going, but it doesn't have quite the clout that it had back then. And people use these sites. This is the other thing that Mike didn't realize. So she wrote a glowing review, and suddenly a lot of people in Hollywood started taking interest, right? Because this short wasn't on, and because this short wasn't on the internet for all to see easily, people had to reach out to Mike and make contact to get access. He also got a call from someone who was like, I see you don't have a manager. And me and Dallas know that game. Turns out now, of course, Mike, being a cynical Bostonian, he was like, who the fuck is this guy? This is not a real manager. But turns out the guy was from the Gotham Group. One of the big and well-respected management companies in the biz. They're East Coast and West Coast. They're literary, they're film and TV, they're everything. And so he got signed at the Gotham Group after talking to this guy and showing him the short film. And then very shortly after got signed at UTA for agents. So this blew up for him. And he found out, like, even when he talked to his manager at the Gotham Group, he's like, yeah, we have people dedicated to just scouring the internet, just finding these shorts and finding mentions of these people. This is not as true today as it was back then, but not at all. But back then, people were so hungry for new talent, and the internet and film festivals and just kind of following that news of like, what is making a splash? What is making a buzz? What seems
are people
to be
talking
interesting?
about? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and now Mike was repped. And so Mike started taking a lot of what are called general meetings. And general meetings, for those not in the biz, are just, your management company and your agency are going to start setting you up for these generals. And it's just really a meet and greet with all these different production companies, studio execs, creative execs at studios. You're not really pitching anything yet. You're just sitting down with them and they're like, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah.
What might we be interested in? Okay,
you're trying to get the vibe. As the kids say, you're trying to get the vibe. You're trying to get the vibe.
And you're also you're getting a in the room rapport with each other, right? Like, how much do you like each other, and how much do you really want to work with each other, kind of a thing.
As a person who routinely used to go into general meetings with a "fuck you, I just want your money to make my art" attitude, which did get me far. Don't do that, kids.
Don't do that, kids. Nope. Now, Mike did a little bit of that, but not too much. He did try to play the game quite a bit. Now, when he was taking these general meetings, he was flying to LA, like from Boston, and then like, trying to pack in as much as he can in like a week and then F off back to the East Coast. So in 2019, he made the move to LA and situated himself here right before the pandemic lockdown. Exactly.
Sorry, Mike.
I know. Now, a few things did happen in between. He was able to set up 12 km. It was optioned to be a potential feature film at Ridley Scott's Scott Free. So they've had it there for all these many years, and he can never talk about how it's going, really. But we think things are going relatively well. Now, the one thing about 12 km, the feature film there, Scott Free was interested right away, but it was going to cost more than anyone really wanted to give a first-time director. Right, of a feature film. And Mike definitely, he's not interested. He's not a writer. He considers himself a director. In fact, he so much does not consider himself a writer that during this time, Mike met writer Will Simmons, a Blacklist winner. And Will is, alongside Mike, sort of like they're collaborating, but Will is writing the 12 km feature script. Like, he is the writer. And the short film that we're here to talk about today, Will is also the writer of this second proof of concept short film that Mike did. So Will and Mike are like bosom buddies. Will is his writer. He's getting this done, and Mike just gets to plainly, creatively, they are always, I know he and Will have like gone off on retreats, writing retreats together to like hash out things, but Will is the script writer. Right. So the story by Mike and Will or something of that nature, I'm assuming. But the script, the writer, like Mike does not seem to be interested in getting writing credit or being one of the writers of the script. But of course he wants it to be his vision. So he's working very closely with Will. But now Will Simmons, this Blacklist writer. And Mike has said things about Will where Will is amazing at, he's like, how you have to grab someone's attention in like the first page of a screenplay. Like, within 1 to 5 pages, people know if they're in or out. They're not 100%. Reading the rest of it. And he's like, he sucked. And Mike has been like, I suck at that. I don't know how to do that. And Will apparently is incredible at that and knows how to like formulate a script to structure it in a way where it's like he knows what's going to keep an executive's attention. He knows how this is going to get them to the finish line. So because 12 km though was going to cost more than most people seem to be willing to give Mike for his first feature, it was time to think about making a second proof of concept short film for a film that theoretically would be much lower budget that he could make as his first feature. So this brings us to who's there. Although, one last important story before we talk about who's there directly. In early 2022, Mike leveraged the popularity of his podcast, In Love with the Process, to try and get people to watch 12 km. So he told his listeners, and I think learning about how people had to reach out to him after the Twitch article to get access to 12 km, he tried this little sneaky thing where he told his listeners that they could DM him on Instagram their top 3 horror movies. And if he agreed, he'd send them the link. And this movie was not available to be seen anywhere else.
Cheeky devil.
Now, note, he actually sends the link to everyone. So the if I agree bit, I think, was just to spice up the challenge of it all. But he's not, if you send him your top 3 horror movies, he's not going to be like, those movies are shit. Again, he's learned his lesson from his youth. So he's not just going to shit on other people's movies or other people's opinions. But then a YouTuber, Big Vic Media, DM'd, he saw this and he's like, oh, that's cool. I got to take, and this is what he does. He takes a look at feature films, at movies, at short films. So he's like, I got to take a look at this short film. He had read the Twitch article, I believe. He had seen Mike make this sort of challenge to his listeners. So basically, this guy, Big Vic Media, he usually has to like, okay, how do I want to present this to my audience to make it compelling? And he realized, this DM thing, I don't have to make up anything. I can just present it what it is. And it's really compelling. So he did. But then he did do one really, I think, and Mike thinks, I'm pretty sure, genius thing where at the end of it, he's like, you have to DM this filmmaker your top 3 horror movies. And if he agrees, he will send you the link to this movie. And he ended it with the question, is this genius or just pretentious? And 2 weeks later, this fucker went viral, like viral. Mike started to receive thousands and thousands of DMs and could not keep up with them. To this day, it can still take him months to respond to your DM because he is that far behind. This thing has gone viral multiple times, in fact, since 2022. Like every 6 months or so, another country, apparently, like it's gone viral in India, it's gone viral like overseas, like another place suddenly gets hold of this question. And everyone loves that, is this genius or pretentious? Everyone wants to weigh in on that shit, right? And so it became engaging. It became the kind of, you can badmouth it. You can say it's just, of course it's pretentious, and everyone wants to do that, of course. So, but it got people to interact, and they would be like, yeah, it's pretentious, and then they'd fucking send him the 3 top horror movies. Then they DM him, of course. So it doesn't matter what your opinion is. You're engaged. You're doing it. And now I will say, I am honestly not 100% sure if 12KM is still available to be viewed in this manner.
Yes, turns out 12KM is available the day after we recorded this episode. Mike went ahead and dropped a short little 5-minute update on his podcast, In Love with the Process, with a very quick update episode titled The Password for 12KM is ... That is going to be right before episode 322 on the podcast, if everyone wants to go check that out. But apparently he had been sending out the password. People were having trouble with it, so he confirmed the password, gave some hints and tips to troubleshoot with it if it wasn't working. So yes, 12KM is available. He is sending it out. From the sound of it, he's sending it out much faster than he has in the past. Apparently 12KM went viral yet again. So let's make Who's There go viral this time, guys. But when you do reach out for Who's There and give Mike your top 3 demonic horror movies, we're going to talk about this in just a moment. Also send your top 3 horror movies, not specifically demonic, for 12KM. Ask for both. He will send you both. All right, let's get back to the show and talk about the details of that.
I have seen it. I DM'd Mike, and I did get that password, and it is brilliant. I love this film. So we're going to talk about Who's There, which is the latest thing that he's doing this with. And when you do this for Who's There, send Mike the top 3 horror films to get 12KM too. Ask. It can't hurt. And see if you can get both, because they're both well worth watching. Now, recently it's become Who's There's turn. So you can DM Mike on Instagram, and it is In Love with the Process POD, In Love with the Process Pod. That's his Instagram. DM him there your top 3 demonic horror movies. All right, so any movies involving demonic possession or demonic beings, and he'll send you a link and password to watch Who's There. Nice. There is no other way to view this short film, full stop.
Say it again. Say it again.
There is no other way to view this film, full stop. You must DM him your top 3 or email him at inlovewiththeprocess@gmail.com. There are links down below in the description of this episode. You can find links. You'll find the email. You will find a link to his Instagram. You will find a link to his website, where you can also then find links to his Instagram and email. So you'll have everything down below. But it is inlovewiththeprocess@gmail.com or inlovewiththeprocesspod, inlovewiththeprocesspod. And there is no other way to view this film, or 12KM for that matter. So for 12KM, your top 3 broad horror movies, all horror movies. And for Who's There, it is your top 3 demonic horror movies.
Demonic, yeah.
Exactly. All right. Now, be patient when you do this. As already mentioned, he is behind the 8 ball on this. And now, recently, so I emailed Mike for Who's There back in February of this year. He emailed it to me end of September. So that was roughly 6 months turnaround time. Now, he did announce on his podcast just a few weeks ago, so after he sent me mine, like a week or 2 later, he announced on his podcast that he finally had an assistant that was helping him with the communications. and that everything's going to get sped up compared to what it's been in the past year. So likely it will go faster than 6 months for you, but nevertheless, just send the DM and fucking forget about it.
That's right.
Yeah, send it and you're like, great, I've done it. Wipe your hands, ignore it. Don't worry.
Right.
Trust me, you'll think about it for a couple days and then you won't. Then life moves on. And then when you get, like, when I got that email, there was a moment, like, it took me a solid couple minutes to understand what I was reading, because I was like, what is this communication? What is it for? What is it from? And then I looked back at what the email chain was, and I was like, oh, holy shit. I had forgotten about it. I forgot I sent this out. Maybe you'll be watching this by Halloween next year.
That's right.
And you'll have a sweet surprise. But there is no other way to watch this, and you might get 2 big proof of concept films from this director, who one is currently set up at Scott Free, and he's been very cagey. He says big things are going on right now. He has already directed a 3rd proof of concept film that has made the festival circuit, called Come Home, with Lance A. Williams, the actor who he's doing the Right Place, Right Time podcast with. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to see that. Right now, that is not available in any way, shape, or form. It's doing the festival circuit still right now, so it has to be unavailable while it's doing that. And then we'll see what happens there. But there seems to be something finally brewing for Mike, I think, on the feature film front. So this is a good time to get in on the ground floor with him, and know who this director is and know what he's got coming up and where he started. Especially if you're into movies, if you consider yourself a cinephile, you want to know about this guy and you want to know about these films. All right. Now, Who's There? Directed by Mike Pecci, written by Will Simmons, as already mentioned, and starring Margot Budzina, Shay Pacheco, and Gene Ravin, who you might remember is the Russian guy from Boston who helped translate 12 km and responded to the thing back in the day. So he was cast as a supporting role in 12 km, and he's one of the 3 leads in Who's There. Okay. The DOP on these films is a guy named David Kruta, Kruta. And David Kruta, he was DOP on 12 km. He's kind of Mike's DOP. They also are, and this is another thing about, like, Right Place, Right Time and In Love with the Process, and something that Mike always harps on is, like, you find your people.
Yeah, you do.
Right? By getting out there and doing things, you find the people that you love each other, you want to work together. And so when the time comes, when that opportunity arises, you are not starting from dead scratch. You've got people in your corner. You've already got a certain working dynamic with. So that's always very important. So always remember that. Now, let's talk about Who's There. It's finally time to talk about the fucking movie itself, because 6 months later, we got to see it. And this was, so in Mike's words, this was a film. It is a proof of concept for a potentially lower budget film than 12 km would be. And I can definitely see that. This is much more contained. But again, all practical effects. All the visual effects were done practically in this one, but done in ways where it did cost less, and a feature film would be a little more much more Blumhousey. Like, you can make this for, beep, maybe even less. I don't know. I don't know what Mike's thinking on that front. I don't want to put words into his mouth, because he has not said what he thinks this would be made for, and I don't. You know what? I might even cut that so no executives hear this and think, like, "Oh, you could do this for under." And I'm like, "I'm
Dave
so sorry, Mike. I should not have put this on the public airwaves. I'll probably cut that." But yeah, what are our thoughts on this? And I believe Mike even says, like, there's definitely some Hellraiser influence here, which I 100% see. And it's a Christmas movie, so it takes place during Christmas time. So if you can get your hands on it in the next couple months, watch it at Christmas with your family and kids.
Good idea. Yeah, good idea. Very good idea.
Do not do that. Not with your kids, at least. With your family, maybe.
They got to grow up sometime.
It's scary, right? It's scary, but it's not gruesome.
That's true.
Well, there is some sort of partial nudity-ish. Very silhouette-y, but you definitely see some nip silhouette, so you gotta be careful there. But outside of that, this is not, as we mentioned in a previous podcast, this is not the Concerned Moms review of this short film. So we do not have to tell you what the adult things in this film are. So we will not, per se. But Dallas, your thoughts on who's there. 10 minutes in and out, done. But what do we think? First off, what do we think of the story and style of this? How did it hit you?
It was, those, okay. I should just read my notes rather than spitballing. I will say this: its visual palette is kind of sumptuous and sleek, oddly sexy. But I associate horror films with sensuality for some reason.
I mean, there is, again, sensuality in the final minutes, especially, is actually a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It takes a while. It's really a family at Christmas looking for a lost kid. In that sense, not sexy at all.
Yeah,
but then goes somewhere weirdly sexy in the final minutes. Yes.
Yeah. I love the sort of media res, the sort of drawing the action already in play, drawing the audience already in play. The moment we hit frame one, we know something's happening. The energy is already there. It's already been wound tight, and we're about to take off into this little journey. I love the kind of Hellraiser-ish concept of the I won't say what it is, but there is
there's something like the mystery, the puzzle box from Hellraiser. For those who have seen Hellraiser or read the Hellbound Heart Clive Barker story, there's a puzzle box that starts everything, and there's an object in this short film that is plainly, I think very I don't think Mike's even hiding it, like plainly inspired by the puzzle box.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Even the way he finds it in the other room, in something is very reminiscent of Hellraiser. I love the father's journey in this. As brief as it may be, it is a full sort of characterization. The setting, the stage work, the stagecraft, the lighting, everything about it is extremely well done. It is a really well done film, and production wise. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a tight little ride. It's a tight little ride. The music is used to great effect to heighten the moment. I think in an episode which will probably air, which will definitely come out before this, we reviewed the new Hellboy film, and one of my chief gripes with that film is the soundscape. It is overused, overwrought, and just a little too sharp throughout the entire thing. And with this film, it's definitely been mixed or engineered so that there are levels, so that the sound sort of enhances the moment rather than being overbearing, and sort of lying over the moment. So I think all the components in this film come together very nicely. And while there isn't, I'm not going to say there's anything necessarily terribly new being
that's fair.
Sort of in terms of a thesis or anything sort of being presented here, that doesn't matter because
it's
at
not
the end
pushing
of the day,
boundaries of any
exactly,
kind,
it's not pushing boundaries, but it is giving you a lovely little spin on a concept that we're fairly familiar with in cinema, with some solid performances, great design, like the production design here. Really, again, it feels so much larger and bigger than this production actually seems to have been. So hats off to him for sure.
The things that stick with me, like the things I keep thinking about after having seen it, and I watched it twice. And after the first time, the main thing that stuck with me the first time was the color palette, right? It's like you can just keep picturing that color palette because it is so unexpected. It's a Christmas movie that has a very dull, on purpose, color palette until the supernatural elements start to come in, and that they have their own color palette, which is not the color palette you quite expect in a Christmassy movie. It's very You can tell Mike is a child of the 80s and 90s with this color palette, but it's like it doesn't, it harkens a little bit back to the neon saturation of the 80s without being on the nose about it. Like it's still its own thing. It's not the way we did it back then, but you can see the influence of like giallo atmosphere and color schemes and color palettes, and the way they were able to drench the atmosphere in color in certain ways, which you wouldn't think
and playing
would work
with the
in
dark
horror.
and negative space, the way they play with the dark and the negative space,
right?
Yeah.
Right. But you would almost think you need, like, for a horror film, you're like, oh, so it's just gonna be dark and that's it.
Right.
And giallo's kind of taught us an opposite of that. It's like, okay, it's dark and there's shadows at play, but
there's dimension,
the stuff in between
dynamic.
the shadows can be very colorful and be still completely terrifying and you know, effective as horror. And I thought, yeah, the atmosphere and the palette that's on display here is great. On the soundscape thing, I agree. It's very subtly done until the final moments, but it works incredibly well. When those final moments begin, this new sound effect suddenly emerges, and it's a very pronounced sound effect that's very alarming and continues until the end of the film once it starts. But it is like, and now we're here. Mm-hmm. And now we're doing this, and bam, here we go. And it tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that the film, you can follow everything that's happening easily, but it explains jack shit none of it.
Right. As you're moving, as the audience is moving into the next room, because it's essentially a series of next rooms, you don't know what you're going to find. And that is, particularly in a short, is a very effective way to increase the tension and expectation of your audience and manipulate it. Because at the end of the day, really effective horror films do one thing really well, which is manipulate the expectations of the audience. And, 10 minutes in and out, we start in the middle of emotion, in the middle of some inertia with these characters. There's a central mystery that's established, and for lack of a better phrase, we end up just sort of wandering through this space in order to find this series of rooms in order to find, figure out the puzzle. And it's pretty effective. It's pretty damn effective. And I will say, as a calling card for director, writer, producer, sort of a proof of concept, you can't get much stronger than something like this. You really can't, because it does a lot of things that are on display that you need to have in your sort of cadre of talents in order to get a producer or a studio interested, or manager and agent. It's a seamless sort of puzzle, 10 minutes in and out. Everything's kind of firing on all cylinders, as we said, not necessarily doing it, breaking any boundaries or adding anything terribly new or outlandish to the conversation, cinematically or thematically, but everything that's done here is done really well. And proof of concept, that's what you want.
Yep. And you can even, like, internally, everything makes enough sense. It's a very short film, so there's not even internally, you don't need to necessarily like make sense. Like, you're not setting up a mythology or anything like that, but just as you go with the flow of what's going on, everything seems right with whatever this setup is. And there is a basic, like, once whatever this object is, once someone unleashes whatever it does, the main crux and why this film is called Who's There is it knocks on things. It knocks on not just doors, but like anything with a handle, essentially. And if you open it after it knocks, that's when something happens.
You're going to find out who's there.
Exactly. And the way, like, the thing that happens to the mother, I just thought was visually, like, it was just that perfect, like, showing just enough. And then the dad had a much lengthier fate, but it worked really well. And this is where almost the slightly more Hellbound Heart / Hellraiser bit comes into it, where you're like, oh, it's such a Clive Barker-y
It is
moment.
Barker-esque.
Yeah, that finale, but all in good ways. And it's not as like Barker would actually probably be more self-indulgent in his version of this, whereas this was much more restrained, which I also really appreciated, because again, you got to do your own version of these things, and I feel like this definitely did. So yeah, who's there, guys? I do love the color palette. It's still, and the final moments, like I still just they replay in my head over and over and over again. So that's staying power, and I appreciate that. So all right.
It's true.
That's what we can say. We're not going to talk about 12km because I've seen it, but Dallas is not. All I can say about 12km is it is lengthier, and in terms of practical effects, even more impressive. But again, that's why it would take more money to do a feature film version, is the kind of things you'd have to do in that film. It's like, it takes a lot more. Who's There is like, we want to do something much more dialed down than what we were doing in 12km, and they pull it off. So I hope to see feature film versions of both in the future. And
I'd like to see a feature film version of this, because, you know, as a person who has created, it's funny when I realized it was sort of about 8 or 9 years ago, I created this concept, which was essentially a hex being put on a house, and everything that opened as a door was basically a doorway to another dimension.
Interesting.
And so, you know, I seeing this, I'm like, yeah, see, it's a solid idea. It's good.
Yeah. If only you would have done something with it.
If only I would have. Yeah, actually, just I know.
Take it from Mike. Do something with it. Get off your duff. Well, on that note, on the note of staying on our duffs, what are we drinking while watching this? Dallas, what would you pair? What did you pair with Who's There?
You know, I started trying to, you know, sort of just muse about what I would pair when I watched this the first time. And by the time I finished it through the first watch, I knew I wanted something that was sort of a light red blend. I know that's a little on brand, and it's a little, you know, on the nose, but occasionally it's okay to be on the nose. You don't need to rock the boat all the time, right? And I remember pairing a wine. It was a white from the Gerard Bertrand winery, and he does they do a line called Trouble, and they're cloudy wines. They're organic, vegan, and
they're very into those lately.
You know, I think because they're a little more. They're a little more interesting
flavorful
in the initial sips. They're they require a bit more challenging to kind of parse.
And does it help that you don't want to drink more than one glass at a time, really?
Yes.
For a lot of these wines? Because again, there's a lot to them, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. That's exactly it. It's like a glass is more than enough at the time, and that's okay. And generally that's my sort of consumption sort of behavior anyway. I don't need a whole lot of anything. I'm a one glass kind of guy generally. But so Bertrand's Trouble line, again, they are cloudy, organic, vegan wines. They are pretty unconventional, pretty non-conventional. The appearance is definitely cloudy because of the vinification methods, and there's an air of sort of mystery to them for sure. I think the last time, I used their white, and I can't remember their cloudy white, what I paired it with, but it was probably about 3 months ago. But I had their red when I picked up this bottle at their tasting, and it's curious. It's mysterious. It's a Syrah and a Grenache blend. It goes through a traditional maceration, destemmed, of course. The temperature is controlled. The wine is filtered, then clarified, but remains cloudy. It's matured in vats. Of course, this is all not news to anyone who's familiar with wine. But in terms of the tasting notes, you get black fruit, you get the currant, you get the raspberry, you get, all the things you would expect from a Grenache and a Syrah blend. But there's also, and I haven't figured out what the note is. There's a note in the back of the throat, on the back of the palate, for me at least. And it's spicy, but it's not capsaicin, and it's not chili. It's I can't figure it out.
Is it
It's
alcohol?
No, because alcohol burns off. Alcohol burns off.
Okay,
it's like
this remains as a tingle of some kind.
Yeah, there's a tingle. I guess that's it. Yeah, there's a tingle. And that's what goes with this guy. Like I said, the first time I watched it, I knew it wanted something a little unconventional, and remembered having troubles white, and I decided to go for the reds. And that's where we are.
Interesting.
How about you?
All right. Cool. All right. Yeah. For me, to be fair, I did not go terribly unconventional either for this one, but for me, I went with a ruby port.
Nice.
Because
I see that.
I just felt, standard ruby port. Now, why ruby port? It is a fortified dessert wine. So you've got the extra alcohol. It's sweet. For some reason, this is a Christmas movie with that color palette. There's something kind of candied about this. That. Really it's not a nice movie. It's not a feel-good film, but it is sweet in its way. So I wanted something, but also dense, like something powerful, sweet, extra alcohol. It's got that fortification. Yeah. And then, it is a short film. So a 2-3 ounce pour of port is exactly what you're going to drink in 10 minutes.
Good point. Yeah.
You're going to sip that. You're going to sip that bad boy nice and slowly. 2-3 sips, you're done. But during those sips, each sip is going to contain so much, just like a short film does too. And especially this short film, where it's like you're packing so much. You've got to get so much information across and show and tell so much in such a bloody short amount of time that it's got that concentration. And you could so port, guys, ruby port is your fresher, younger version of port. You can do a tawny port, which gets a lot more oak exposure for longer periods of time, which is why it's brown rather than bright red.
I could see a good tawny port going with this as well because of the
brevity. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no with the tawny. Because the tawny is just too earthy. The tawny is just too, it's not the flavor of this short to me. The ruby port was necessary for me. Now, a tawny works in a pinch if that's what you like, and you're like, ruby port, fine, do a tawny port, you assholes. I don't care. But for me, if I'm going to say like, what is the pairing that pairs, I got to go with a ruby. Now you can do a ruby port, I drank the Porto Morgado.
Oh yeah.
That you can just get at Trader Joe's for, I think it's $10.99 a bottle.
That's right.
Right. It's such amazing value. I like this port quite a bit. And for a ruby port, for a young, fresh ruby port, I'm like, it is incredible value at $10.99. It's easily worth $20.
I'm going to give you a little, not even a hack, just a sort of thing. If you pour a glass of the ruby port and sit it in the sun for like directly in sunlight for like 10 minutes, there's something that happens with the sort of caramels in it that just,
Okay. See, you just want a tawny port. Just drink a fucking tawny port.
No, not at all. No. I just like the idea of the syrupiness of the
but you want to caramelize it, and that's where you
it's not caramelizing. It's not caramelizing. It's literally you're just putting it in the rays of the sun for a few minutes to kind of allow it to warm just a bit from the sun. It's kind of fantastic.
No, thank you.
Also, that's great over ice cream. Not that I haven't eaten 5,000 gallons of that in my life.
Right. Well, that's the opposite of eating it in the sun, but it goes well anyway. I will try the warming. I will try the warming it up, but I'm going to say no. I like it. I like it a little chill on my ruby port. But you can get ruby port. Well, basically just your basic straight up ruby port, or you could do late bottled vintage port, LBV port, which is a ruby port. And late bottle vintage is one that They hold back for many extra years before releasing, which is why it's late to go into the bottle, late bottled. Now, it is not as good. It's not as high quality as a proper vintage port. And a vintage port will be a port that has a year on it. So, you're going to see like a 2018 or a 2019 port. Most port is non-vintage. It's a mixture of different years. They just keep pouring, of different ages. They all just kind of blend together, and they pour a little more of the young stuff in with the old stuff, and they just keep it going. And that's your standard port. And then the vintage port is the best of the best. But you got to age that fucker, which is the problem with vintage port. Like, you don't want to drink it young. That's not when it's best. It's going to get so much better 10 years down the line. So you want to sit on that guy for a little while. Late bottle vintage is actually something ready to be drunk young as well. So late bottle vintage is as close as you get to vintage while still drinking it young and right away. Do not age it. It's usually lower quality grapes that they use for the late bottle vintage. That's why they age it that extra long time. It makes it smoother and nicer, even though the grapes are not as good. And it is meant to be drunk young. So I would go with an LBV or just your straight up Ruby port. Those are the two that I would highly recommend. Vintage port, if you got one that's at least 10 years old, crack that fucker open with Who's There, man. Do it. Especially if you've had to wait 6 months or more for the film to be delivered to you. That is a celebration right there to be had.
That's true.
But otherwise, there's something about Ruby Port where it matches the duration of the film. It matches the atmosphere and the color palette. There's something about the density and the sweetness with that extra spike of alcohol and richness. It's just because, again, it's rich. The color palette, the sound design, everything, it's rich. And I wanted something rich like that Ruby Port. So yeah, that's my guy. Ruby Port. Dallas, Trouble, Cloudy Red. All right. And Who's There? Once again, go to Instagram, In Love with the Process POD, In Love with the Process Pod. That is Mike's account. DM him there your top 3 demonic horror movies for Who's There, or DM him your top 3 horror movies to try and get 12KM as well. And you can also go to inlovewiththeprocess.com and listen, definitely, especially if you're interested in this kind of stuff, listen to In Love with the Process podcast, because it's one of those you definitely want to listen to on a long drive, a long walk, or while you're working out, because they tend to be epic. They're long conversations, but they're wonderful. They're in depth, and he sometimes has some really cool guests. He had Uwe Boll on recently.
Oh wow.
Yeah, exactly. So
I may have to go listen to that one.
You'll get some crackers in there, man. Like those directors, like the ones you don't think are going to do a podcast, right? And you're like, whoa, what the fuck?
By the way, that is going to be our pull quote after you mentioning Uwe Boll going, yeah, he sometimes gets some crackers in there. Very nice.
And once again, folks, this is a movie you can only watch by DMing him these things. That's so right. You cannot watch it any other way. So get on there, get to it. And once again, this has been Wine And. We will be back in 1 week with another wine and entertainment pairing for your entertainment. Ciao. Take care until then. We have one more next week for Halloween, where we tackle the most horrific subject of all time, elections. And we will be celebrating that by covering the 1999 movie Election, starring Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon. This is going to be fun. Dallas has never seen it.
Nope.
So I cannot wait to see what he thinks about this cult classic. And good luck to everyone on Election Day. I'll say that again when we actually drop our Election Day election episode, which will drop directly on Halloween to celebrate how horrific elections are. Ciao until now, guys. Take care. See you then.
Later, guys. Muppet Babies.
Yeah, you noticed that. Yeah.
Don't worry, I do it all the time myself.
I know. I don't know where that came from, and then when you recognized it, I'm like, wow. I'm not even sure my brain entirely recognized it when it was happening.
I do it all the time.
For those of you out there, If anyone out there does not recognize what we just did, and I don't know, I might make this a short, a little bit, but yeah, the bada bada animal, but I think it's Animal who does the bada bada. No.
Is
It's one
that
of the
Animal?
jazz
No,
musicians.
Yeah.
Bada bada da 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 da.
Yeah.
Bada bada da da da.
I do that shit all the time.
Oh my God, Sesame Street, get some culture if you don't know what we're talking about.
That's right.
Look that up. I have no idea how you're going to look that up, but try to look that up and see if you can.
I'm sure YouTube's got it. I'm sure, yeah.
All right. Proper. Here we go.